Please stop asking people if they're fluent. Does anybody else hate it when someone asks, "Oh, are you fluent in the language you're learning?" What do you mean? And I've actually asked that before. What do you mean? Typically, I get an array of responses. What some people say is, "Oh, what I mean is, are you able to comfortably have a conversation? Do you have good listening comprehension?" And then there's the other people that are basically like, "Oh, when you speak, do you speak it perfectly? Do you sound like a native speaker when you speak? Do you have no detectable accent? Do you make no grammar issues at all? Do you have no pauses or lulls in conversations? Can you talk about any topic given to you?" No, but seriously, I think this brings up a question that I find very interesting, and that question is, what does it mean to be fluent? If you're asking yourself, who is this girl? Hi, my name is Maddie. I am an English teacher online. I teach English to mainly adults. I speak 6 different languages at varying levels. I have a Bachelor's of Arts degree in French, and I was an international scholar in Brazil for a year. So I have a bit of experience when it comes to second language acquisition, when it comes to proficiency testing, and basically the details of what each level on the proficiency scale means. What my thesis for this video essay is essentially stating is that since there's so much ambiguity within the idea of fluency, it's not an effective goal for language learners to reach for when creating a language plan or starting on a language journey. In addition to that, there's also misconceptions as to what fluency actually is, and when it's on the extreme end of the spectrum, and fluency is conflated with the idea of being a native level speaker or bilingual, that's problematic in and of itself. And I would actually like to dive into how much work it takes to get to that level. The purpose of this video is to basically help you, the language learner, detach from this want or this need to be fluent in a language and to redirect your attention towards more productive language goals that are relevant to what you actually want. There's not really a clear-cut definition for fluency. One quote that pretty much sums up the discrepancies is from Paul Lennon. He was a professor at Bielefeld University, and he has a lot of experience and has done a lot of research in terms of second language acquisition. He defines fluency as rapid, smooth, accurate, lucid, and efficient translation of thought or communicative intention into language. Now see, even within that statement, there's a lot of ambiguity. Even when I'm speaking English, if I don't get enough sleep, if I'm sick, if I've been eating poorly, if I'm stressed out, I'm not gonna articulate myself very well. If I don't regularly practice writing, the first couple times I try to write an opinion piece or I have to write a professional email, it's gonna sound crazy. Language learning is very performance-based. Just because your performance is rougher on some days than other days, that doesn't mean that you're not skilled or qualified to speak the language. It just means simply that you're having a hard day. So I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience with language learning. Maybe it's not like this in most places. Again, anecdotal experience, but at least from my experience within the United States, the response is like, "Oh my gosh, that's so interesting, that's so cool, I'm learning a language, or I want to learn a language," and great, yeah, positivity, building each other up. I've had many encounters where, you're in college and you're having casual conversations. "Oh, hey, what are you studying?" "Oh, French." As soon as the words left my lips that I was studying French. "Oh, so you're like fluent? So how good are you at French?" It always baffled me because for no other major would I respond in a way like that. "Oh, you're studying biomedical studies? How well do you know the anatomy of a body?" "Oh, you're studying law? Well, how well do you know the Constitution of the United States?" It's something that subconsciously put a lot of pressure on me. Like I had to prove myself. Oh, if I'm gonna say I'm studying a language, I better be perfect at that language. Like I'm an undergrad. Looking back on it now, I just have empathy for myself at that point because I was just a girl. I was just a girl trying to get her college education. Part of any learning process is making mistakes. And I think it blockaded a lot of my learning and it made me procrastinate on a lot of things and develop unhealthy mindsets when it came to language learning. When I went to Brazil, I felt a different kind of pressure on my shoulders because at that point, I was there for a Boren scholarship that I had competed for and won. I felt so many conflicting emotions at that time. I felt proud because I was finally reaping the fruits of my hard labor. I felt scared because I had never moved to a foreign country before. I was excited because I had learned so much about Brazil and I was very curious. I wanted to see what it was like. I was very intrigued by Brazilian culture. I think I connect with a lot of values within Brazilian culture. And I also felt an immense amount of pressure because if I ever felt like I had to prove something at any point, it was then. I felt like I had to prove that I deserved that scholarship. So when I got there, I was very frustrated with how limited my communication was. I could feel the language barrier. And there were a lot of people around me that spoke English and I was near other Americans there. But it was always frustrating when I met somebody else my age that was Brazilian and I couldn't communicate with them. I remember I was having this conversation with one of my roommates and he was actually there on the same scholarship as me. And I was telling him, I want my Portuguese to be perfect. I want to have no accent. I want it to be undetectable that I'm a foreigner. I think a lot of that was not only insecurity that I had internalized from people's negative comments, but insecurity that I had from being a foreigner. And I remember my roommate basically responding, but why? Why do you want that? And is that a realistic goal to set for yourself? And at the time, I think those words kind of flew over my head because I was just so hyper fixated on this is what I need to do. In my mind at that point, I felt as though, if I accomplish this, then I'm finally gonna feel like I made it. Then I'm finally gonna feel comfortable. Then I'm finally gonna feel as though I've assimilated or done what I came here to do. I think that type of mindset delayed a lot of the language progress I could have made in the beginning. I think at a certain point, it's like all this tension was building up of restricting myself from speaking. And I just eventually got to a point after like 4 or 5, 6-ish months where I got fed up and I just basically said, I don't care anymore. If people think I'm stupid, if I'm not the most fluent person ever, if I didn't have the fastest progress compared to anybody else, I don't care. I just want to give myself the opportunity to experience being here. And essentially what I started practicing was exposure therapy. I would put myself in very uncomfortable situations, and it's always the same pattern. When you initially put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, there's a spike in anxiety. But as long as you sit with the emotion, eventually it will taper down. Even if the anxiety doesn't totally dissipate, it'll get tolerable. This is an important skill to practice because it teaches you how to face your fears. It's okay if you're scared. You don't have to feel ready. You just gotta do it. When I had that mindset shift, I was not only able to enjoy Brazil so much more, but my Portuguese improved significantly. I was just focused on why I was there. And that made me more excited to go to class. That made me more excited to learn, because anytime that I made a mistake or anytime I had to admit that I didn't know something, I wasn't beating myself up in my head and cussing myself out and telling myself, what are you doing? You need to prove that you earned this. I was just there. I was just existing. And also when your mind isn't so clouded with negative, self-destructive ideas, you have more space to retain productive and useful information. It opened me up to so many experiences that not only educated me, but it enriched me. I remember when I went to Rio, there was a Brazilian that I knew from a friend that was teaching English in France. Crazy connection. And when I went to Rio, I asked them, oh, do you know anybody here? And they put me in contact with some people they met back home and that then lived in Rio. I was very nervous at first to meet them because they told me that their friends mainly spoke Portuguese, so I was very nervous. today, those are my dads now. And to think that experience never would have happened if I kept telling myself, oh, my Portuguese isn't good enough, I need to be fluent. That's why I think this conversation is so important, because I know I'm not the only person who's had this experience when learning a language. And this yearning or this search of reaching a perfect level in a language, it doesn't exist. I also want to make it very clear that there's no problem in being very ambitious with your language goals. In general, that's not the goal for everybody, and that's okay, because you do not need a C2 level to function. Because here's the gag, most people don't speak C2 in their own native language. So we've already discussed how the idea of fluency is something very ambiguous, subjective, difficult to define. But now we're going to address what people mean or what they think when they are on the extreme side of their perception with fluency. So the scale that I have the most experience with is ILR, because that's the scale system that the federal government uses in the United States. But I am also somewhat familiar with CEFR as well, just because that was the language scale used at my language school in Rio, and because that's the basis of the proficiency test I'm taking in French. C2 is equivalent to ILR 5, which is the highest score you can get on the ILR scale. That is essentially mastery of a language. I want to make it clear that most native speakers do not have a C2 or an ILR 5 level of their native language. Having a native or bilingual level is not the equivalent of just being able to comfortably talk. Let me read you in my little notebook here everything you have to do to be considered C2 or ILR 5. This is specifically for French. So you have to know all verb tenses, present, past, future, conditional, subjunctive, passé, simple in literature. You have to know the compound tenses, plus que parfait, futur intérieur, conditionnel passé. You have to know all of the nuances within the subjunctive tense. You have to know the passive voice. You have to know adverbial pronouns, negative pronouns, reflexive verbs. You have to know indirect speech, relative clauses, advanced negation, inversion, and emphasis structures. For vocabulary, you have to know idioms and colloquialisms. You have to know formal and academic expressions. You have to know jargon from multiple domains, politics, philosophy, etc. You have to know precise and nuanced synonyms. You have to know 8,000 to 10,000 words. You have to have the capacity to read dense academic texts, literature with old poetic language, nuanced arguments, satire, irony, and metaphors, specialized vocabulary in news, science, politics, etc. You have to be able to express yourself naturally and persuasively. You have to be able to debate and argue complex topics. You have to be able to use humor, irony, and figurative language comfortably, adapt your tone and register. You have to be able to know when to speak informally versus formally and when to be respectful versus playful. You have to know how to handle professional settings such as meetings, negotiations, interviews. I'm not done yet. You have to be able to write detailed essays, reports, and formal letters. You have to be able to write creative pieces with literary style. You have to be able to write well-structured arguments. You have to have academic level writing with connectors and rhetorical devices with minimum errors. That's all. Having what these language agencies deem as a bilingual or a native level of proficiency, that is a very specialized level of knowledge that's not required for everybody doing their day-to-day. To give you more of an idea of how difficult it is to achieve a native or a bilingual level of proficiency, let me read you something. So the State Department has basically like a language difficulty, not scale, but they have categories. So it's 4 categories, and they've grouped up languages, and they've basically deemed difficulty level on how long it takes to get to an ILR 3 level. ILR 3. In general, it takes English speakers anywhere from 24 to 30 weeks total to learn the language. 552 to 690 class hours. Not too bad. Just wait for it. This is what they say. The following language learning timelines indicate the time usually expected for a student to reach an integrated score of 3, speaking and listening, not judging reading or writing comprehension. Though the actual time can vary based on several factors, including the language learner's natural ability, prior language learning experience, and time spent in the classroom. This is the gag. A typical week is 23 hours per week in class and 17 hours of self-study. So 24 to 30 weeks doesn't sound all that bad until you realize how many hours are being put in a week. And these studies were done on people that were either like me, where they were being funded by the government to learn a language, so their expenses were covered and they didn't have to work, and their number one priority was learning this language, or people that are foreign service officers or diplomats that are going through intensive training and they can dedicate all that energy to learning language. 23 hours per week in class and 17 hours of self-study. I mean, to be honest, that's what I did in Brazil, especially when I was in Rio, for sure, easily. But 23 hours a week in class, that's already insane, especially if you work full time. If you work 40 hours a week, 23 hours a week of class. And then you add 17 hours of self-study on top of that. And I really like that it included that there's many factors that can vary the results. For instance, even though English is my native language, Bisaya, it's been difficult in some ways for me because I don't have that many online resources, but because I'm familiar with the language, I grew up around it, even though I couldn't speak it and I never could understand it, I'm picking up on it because it's not so foreign to me. I grew up hearing it all my life. It makes some sense to me. Maybe on paper, it's gonna look like I'm making more progress than the average person, but there's a lot of factors that can affect it, such as if you have no language learning experience, it's your first time learning how to learn a language, that's another conversation. The more you learn languages, the better that you get at learning a language, if that makes any sense, because you realize that it's a system and everybody has their own proper system that helps them learn a language efficiently. And so once you've learned a couple more languages, you start to realize what your system is, and it makes the process so much more efficient. So if you're studying for 40 hours a week for half a year, you can get like a B2 level or an ILR3 level in a language, but most people can't afford that. So that's where the idea of fluency can be a little bit self-defeating, especially when you have, like how I had, this notion that fluency is like a native or bilingual level of a language, and that's like the only acceptable or impressive level to have of a language. Even to make it to a full working proficiency, ILR3 in another language, that is very impressive because as you can see, it takes a lot of work to do so. There's nothing wrong in and of itself with the term fluency, but I think it's important to clarify the ambiguity within the term because I think it's conflated with native or bilingual level proficiency, and the two are not necessarily related. Learning a language, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Obviously, there's exceptions, but when we're talking about the rule, slow and steady wins the race, baby. It's more about consistency than anything. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to let me know by giving me a like down below. And if you're curious to see what I'm coming out with next, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Comment down below and let me know, what is your opinion on the term fluency? Have you ever felt restricted in your language goals because you were so hyper-focused on obtaining perfect fluency? Mimi, what are your opinions? So I know on the Instagram and YouTube polls, initially what it means to be fluent won, but right now I actually think Ratatouille's in the lead. So if you want to see what I have in store for Ratatouille, make sure you check out the channel on Saturday. Okay guys, take care. I'll see you then.